acceleration is absolute. I was fascinated even again recently to watch some of the best players play with their clubs, and guys who couldn't do stuff at the highest level just steaming past players, and it's just that first couple of meters. So it is absolutely worth training, but then the constraints of the game mean that that's only going to bring you so far.
That was Kevin Mulcahy, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by Gym Studio. Gym Studio is a frictionless gym and studio management software. It can effortlessly manage memberships, schedule classes, track attendance, and even automate billing. To check out what Gym Studio can do for you, head to gymstudio.com and set up your free 14-day trial in less than 5 minutes. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. This week's guest is Kevin Mulcahy. Kevin is a strength and conditioning coach as well as sports coach with over 30 years of experience. Kevin has a unique skill set as he's worked with multiple athletes, professionals, and clubs under the umbrellas of physical preparation, skill acquisition, as well as tactical and technical preparation. It's awesome to talk speed training, but ultimately, if we can integrate that speed training into the constraints and needs of the game itself, that is where the ultimate transfer lies. And on today's show, Kevin will talk about his own approach to game speed training in light of skill acquisition and tactical advantages. He'll talk about general games, as well as ideas on acceleration, deceleration, aerobic capacity, this and much more. It was awesome talking to Kevin. Let's get to 449 here with Kevin Mulcahy. Kevin, it is awesome to have you back on the show, and I'm excited for our conversation today.
Hi, Joel. It's fantastic to be back on and great to chat to you again. It's always a good chat.
Yeah, I really enjoy getting your emails each week, and to me it really helps just continue to bridge some of those gaps that exist between, hey, we're just trying to get faster or whatever singular physical quality and what actually happens in the game. And I know we'll talk about a lot of different variations of that today, but one thing that's just very simple and on the play-based level is I noticed in some of your gym sessions you had. I find this funny because here in the United States, I try to make, unless you're a soccer player or football, soccer, I try to make you play soccer in some way. Lee Taft talks about that. Like if you don't play soccer, do something with soccer for foot ability and agility. But I saw you had a couple basketball hoops up for your athletes. I don't even know what game you were playing, but it looked like a lot of fun. I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about how you use basketball hoops and some of the games you play for either warm up or just whatever you're trying to get out of those game setups.
So I'll give some context to that because it'll help people understand. Working with a club, which is quite a big urban club. So in a week, we decided to do 6 weeks pre-Christmas in a block, 6 weeks post-Christmas, and it's up to 250 athletes I meet over about 10 or 12 hours, right? So boys, girls, 13, 14, 15, 16, up to 18. And what the videos you saw there was the under 16 boys, and they are Gaelic footballers and hurlers. Okay, so the Irish Gaelic Athletic Association is dual. It has two sports. Okay, so just imagine baseball and basketball were kind of run by the same organization.
Got it. Awesome.
So a lot of people, particularly where I'm from in Ireland, it does vary. You get football areas, you get predominantly hurling areas, but where I'm from, it tends to be quite dual. So most 85+% would play both. So we are just getting them, I suppose, with particularly some of these guys would be used to the gym, but it was a familiarization process. Okay. And some of my thinking was I didn't want to overload them. Now, this particular group probably love the gym. They're 15, 16-year-old boys. They're getting into it. They're that age where it's fairly easy sell. And the culture is quite strong in S&C in Gaelic games, So, but to break up the sessions and not do too much in the off season, and really is off season at the moment, and to keep that energy system challenge and a bit of agility work, we broke it up into 2 or 3 blocks. So they would do some gym work, they might do some running, which some of the teams are doing now, and they will do some games-based stuff. And what you saw in the video there was I have a few core games. Like I use Olympic handball a lot, use tag rugby. We play NFL, what we call NFL, which is kind of a tag American football, and all sorts of things in between. And then I'm using constraints, but we'd use the same game 2 or 3 times in a row with a couple of constraints, and then I noticed there was 4 basketball hoops there.
Yeah.
So, um, I just wanted to change it up, and I just said, right, before any score, you had to work it through one of the 4 hoops.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
So that was the constraint. And then ironically, out of that, me and a couple of the coaches were on the sideline, obviously just watching, and it's good fun. We're just laughing, giving guys black cards, putting them on and off,
Yeah.
making it as competitive as we can. And we noticed that there was a battle underneath the basket that was really interesting movement and strength wise for Gaelic football
Hmm.
and hurling. Both have a big overhead element to them. So the basketball would go up, and invariably these guys are not that incredibly skilled at basketball, and it's a smaller ball and all that. So it was breaking, and there was a challenge, and there was all these movement skills, and I thought, wow, this is a good game I'm going to use again, because, or we might even make it a smaller 3v3, like half court across the court, because that's the way they were, the way basketball
Yeah.
can be half court, basketball nets, I should say. So, and we could double down and use the proper football, right? And just modify it in a small way, and then you can get into some detail with them, like how do you challenge for a breaking ball, which is the term we use in Gaelic football, or how do you win the position to make it easier to catch the ball, So, and that was just from play,
Hmm.
just random games. So that was interesting, and that's what you would have seen there. And we use all kinds of constraints.
Yeah. I imagine, or it's interesting to think about. I guess we talk a lot about specialization with the athlete. Like, okay, this athlete played this one sport way too early, but we don't talk too much about that in the level of the coach. And in the sense of like using another game to influence the way you think about the main game. It's like, or even musicians, like you jam with another band and you learn
Yeah.
something. And even I think too about, and I don't know, maybe I probably get biased as every generation does about the upcoming generation, but I look at like the artists of the 80s and 90s or like who could sing and dance and do all these things, and there's all this cross pollination of ideas that happens. So it's like the games before, to me, it's like they're like a primordial soup almost. Like where it all started from, and it's where all these ideas can now come from. It's like, oh, I see that show up in the game. This is cool, or like I like how you have that constraint too. You have to pass it through the hoop before you score, and to think about how could you apply that to the game practice, like adding in a constraint. You have to do this thing before you score down the field and things like that. So super interesting.
Exactly. And I do stuff like that to maybe slow a game.
Oh
So
yeah.
in Gaelic football, how are we going to deal with set or slow attack, or indeed on the flip, set or slow defense? We would have stolen basically the kind of 4 game moments of from soccer that Mourinho would have made
Mm.
popular, and other coaches like that. And that there's 4 main moments in the game. You have turnover to fast transition attacking. If they get back and set up well, then it's probably turned into a set or a slow attack. You got to figure that out. And then obviously on the flip, the opposite is true as well. And then the other phases would be restarts. So sometimes you might put in a constraint to allow the defense to get back,
Okay.
right? And then and that might be, if you turn over the ball, you have to hit the ball to both wings
Mm.
before you get the score, or maybe one wing. Depends on how long you want to slow it. Depends on the sport. You could use that in hockey, soccer. It's endless. It's a very invasion type sport concept. So, and equally, then you can use different constraints to speed it up, which is kind of where we're going and what we want to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I love just like the talk about speeds too. I mean, my mind goes to some of the general applications that could go in a game. Like you watch a game, it's like, oh, this team's got a really slow, methodical offense, or this team likes to run, and it's usually kind of one sided. Usually, it's almost like it's kind of like the only thing they do a lot of times. This is just how we play, but to have more than one bag, in the game is so critical. And I've been thinking a lot as well about And this was a concept that Aaron Cantor, who's on this podcast, really got me thinking about this, and to take it to the just purely physical domain. So not even skill. I mean, there's skill with it, but like doing something like a long lunge hold, like a long wall sit or isometric lunge hold before you get into the speed or whatever else you do. There's like a withholding with that. Like it's like, when do I get to go fast? But I think it's because it's interesting. We live in a culture where it's like, well, you should just get to go fast and do everything right away. And I even think about if a team you're playing in, a team they could win just by being faster, and that's the only thing they do and the only thing they get good at. You're going to be good until you have a team that stops or until they figure out how to stop it. So it's like that constant interplay and harmony of it all. And even just back to the physical very quickly, I was even doing this with a group doing some running training, working with the military, or they're going into special forces and boot camp and things. And I do a lot of withholding with breath training in the running, working from slow and just really lousy breath patterns that are very difficult to a performance breath where you get to breathe quicker and more dynamically. And as soon as you come out of the slow and you get to go in the fast, it's like the tension shift is massive. But if we just went into the performance right away, you wouldn't have got the effect you did. You almost have to do the time, not like oh, you got to condition, you got to suffer, do the time, but it's more you got to do the time so that you can release out of it. So sorry, I'm kind of going off on a little tangent, but I just say that to say I think it's universal too. Like the speeds, a lot of times I think in a lot of culture, it's either people are kind of either one side or the other. It's either condition and suffer or everything is speed. And to be able to toggle, I think there's a beauty to that. And I love how you're looking at that in the games and you can bring that in.
Yeah. Toggle is a great word. So I just took a few notes there while you were talking. Like even we were talking about Penny, my small baby now, and you've a 1-year-old, watching her, it's great to be interested in motor learning and to be around have a child growing.
Yes.
Okay. And and looking at the things, the ways she can speed up to crying or to needing something, or to when she's really, really calm. And like everything you were saying there is like what I've been observing for the last 5 months, So I think that stuff, to the ability to, she can't regulate herself yet, even when a baby cries sometimes, and it goes on to that hysterical level, and you're like, as a parent, you're going, oh my God, like, what, are you okay? What's wrong? And you don't know what to do. But you're just trying to calm down. I use breathing with her, actually. Now, how effective it is, I'm not too sure. I think it helps, right? And I put her on my chest and I try to slow everything down, right? The things you were talking about there, like, I think a lot. I try to keep principles, big words, easy to remember and understand. And that's a challenge at times because I have a lot of information that I want to give to players. But, I think small game, big game, slow play, fast play. And then, like, speed is a constraint. And I think we briefly spoke with this before. Maybe we spoke offline about it. Is, a lot of players, particularly if they're not challenged when they're younger, their great speed can be a constraint because they overwhelm other players due to their speed when they're younger, and maybe don't learn the motor skills of the sport, let's say, as they go. And that, and then very often maybe to do with their nervous system makeup. I can't reach for the correct language at the moment, but they're not able to calm themselves down in a game. And we see lots of sports teams now using breathing, and the Irish rugby team are kind of the one who made it obvious and popular here, was because after they gave up a try, they would go behind the goal and they were doing very deliberate breathing. Now, that's a very clear mark in the game where you get a break to reset and get back to whatever you want to do. And I think that ability, and the really best teams, even though I don't like their style that much, there is a lot to admire about the way Guardiola played with Manchester City, and they were so dominant. But they played really slow at times, and they had quality players, and they stayed in their positions and all that. But then there was bursts. So what I would say, when we slow down, we need someone to explode.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
We need someone to make a cut, whatever kind of triggers. And I think that happens largely with practice. and then practice in the actual competition over time with a group of players, or to know when you see your teammate turning an angle or collecting a ball and moving one way, and you just know he's going to turn to pass
Mm.
back, and you can make the cut run then from the wing, let's say, towards the goal, whatever it is. I mean, every sport, basketball has really deeply worked on that over a many number of years, to where I think a lot of sports steal those kind of movements from basketball. So that makes you a more dominant team, I think, or a more flexible and a harder to figure out team. And it is a tactic to play slow, play fast, and really good teams, whether it's coached or whether the players, or it could be, I suppose, instigated by the coach. The ideas may come from the coach, or in a co-coaching way with the players. But when I talk to the teams I coach, like, I do really want to get to a level where the only thing I'm doing on the sideline is maybe making subs, right? And that you have such a feel for the game and yourselves that, like, we're just going to drop off now. We're just going to drop off. We've made 5 transitions in 8 minutes. They are in a Gaelic football, let's say, using that as an example. You're running over 20 k's an hour for 60 to 80, 100 meters. Then you might have to get back if there's a turnover. And those phases can go and go and go and go. And then, like, the ability and experience and tactical awareness to just drop a few lines, be defensive for a little bit, soak it up, get a kick out, whatever. Like, that's where I'm trying to get to, and that they can understand the feel of a game and when to go and when to pull the handbrake.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I know last time we talked as well about like conditioning in light of like tactics. Or what are you doing on the field? How can you fill those buckets through conditioning based off tactical needs? I'd like to shift a little bit more into, and it's kind of, what we were just talking about, like change of tempo, change of speed. And I think there's so much focus now. It seems like things seem to fall very singular before they, I guess, branch out and get more complex. But there's a big focus on a lot of raw speed stuff and linear speed and track speed. And so I know you've had some posts on this type of thing. But basically, I'd like to ask you, how far can something more simple and linear like a tracks? I'd like to say even speed, but I know I'd like to get your take on like track speed and track mechanics in there. But how far can linear speed go before it really has to branch out and flourish to move the needle in the game? And I suppose it probably differs by the game a little bit, but general thoughts on that one.
I think there's huge gaps that can be closed. So I think about coordination, and I do come from ecological thinking. So if we think about Newell's approach to coordination, that in the physical sense, at least, it has expanded a bit now. Keith Davids and people like that have expanded the ideas of that, but that coordination is the first kind of stage of our movement. Then we find some stability, and then there's a kind of a skilled expression or action after that, right? And it's non-linear, and with different movements, we're in and out, and we're going up and down the scale. And as we move through levels or challenges in the sport, or move from sport to sport, or even from ages, those things are going to vary, right? So I was lucky enough years and years ago to get a bit of a jump in my area and in S&C with teams in Cork years ago, because I worked with a track coach, okay? And he helped me with acceleration. And that had a massive effect on us. And I picked up stuff around Charlie Francis, tempo running, this kind of stuff as well. And I just got the jump on other teams and coaches because of that. But that was very, and of course, that's quite common now. And even 16-year-olds are coming through now with those as kind of staples of, or they've met someone along the way. I will do a lot of work in acceleration with these kids I'm working with. Okay. We're indoors at the moment. We'll start adding bits and pieces. So if there's a poor coordination level, if they can't apply force to the ground, absolutely go to the track stuff. Like, those guys are doing it all the time. And while we may not need to get into the biomechanics, the small technicalities of what a 100-meter sprinter might need to worry about, 100%. I love that stuff, and it has an immediate effect. Like, and then I agree with the ideas of sprinting and just going for it. And most people would go from short to long with a team, maybe early season, and go to 20, 30 meters accelerations up to 60, 80 meter all outs and curve running and all that kind of stuff. Um, so from that point of view, it's very useful. Okay. But there is a tipping point where, not that we abandon it, but that the game movements and the speeds and the decisions I make are all much more intertwined, right? So, I mean, the difference, it's again going back to Gaelic games, right? There is a bit of an anomaly in Gaelic games where the elite players actually, and it's very linear now in the sense that the first 6 months of the year, the elite players play with the elite teams. And then for the rest of the season, maybe 3 to 5 months, they play with their local clubs. Okay. Which is a great part of the culture, to be honest. It's what makes it pretty unique. So the best guys who play in the All Ireland final in front of 82,000 people, literally sometimes within 7 days, are back in front of 150 people in rural West Kerry, right? So, and that is real, right? So, but when you watch them these days, right, particularly teams are much more conditioned. Their acceleration is the game changer. So when you see them back with their friends and their peers, back at the next level down, even though it's still a decent level, acceleration is absolute. I was fascinated even again recently to watch some of the best players play with their clubs, and you know, guys who couldn't do stuff at the highest level just steaming past players, and it's just that first couple of meters. So it is absolutely worth training. But then the constraints of the game mean that that's only going to bring you so far. In Gaelic football, again, training acceleration and trying to create games, even playing handball in an alley, right? Olympic handball in an alley will have an awful lot of changes of direction, planting, small accelerations. I see great use in that because Gaelic football, I think somewhere between 160 and 200 accelerations a game, right? So that's quite a lot of accelerations, quite a lot of opportunities to get injured, maybe if you want to look at it like that. So absolutely, that linear training I think is valuable. The less coordinated you are, the more valuable it is. And one actual addition to this, Joel, maybe it's just a reminder, but really recently, some of the kids I'm working with are really skilled. Okay. Like there's a couple of kids in particular, I've seen them play hurling, and hurling's a very technical and skillful sport. And they are exceptional, right? And they're appalling at accelerating, right? They are terrible in the gym, trying to get them to hinges. And it's a nice reminder to me that like you learn what you practice. They have developed motor skills, possibly without doing any external training, let's say. And these are young kids now enough, 10, 11, 12, 13 maybe. And they've learned to move in that environment of the game of hurling or Gaelic football. So I think we need to bring it on another level. Okay. And I would have for quite a while, would have done Charlie Francis type tempos, accelerated short to long, sprinting, done some mass running and maybe VO2 kind of stuff for years and years and years. And I created condition games and I let the game do the rest of it. Right. And that was the large approach. I think I've heard Stuart McMillan say something along those lines but I've kind of moved away from that a little bit in the sense that I think I can be more deliberate about the type of speed and the type of specific conditioning, the game conditioning, that I do with a football team in particular. It's largely Gaelic football I coach, and now I'm a hybrid coach. So I started designing with that in mind, that if we're going to repeat something, we repeat it in a chaotic environment, right? But then I can start constraining. Does this look like the game? Are these the distances we're going to transition? How do I motivate players and incentivize players to actually go all out? How do I incentivize the defenders to be aggressive and try to stop their teammates at training? So that's where I've gone the last number of years, and I believe also and it's hard to prove, but I believe there is injury reduction elements to that as well, and it brings that robustness on another level.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to think about on a basic level. And maybe this is kind of working with the polarity idea of, okay, do some things fast and then slow it down. And then you could toggle that tempo. And developmentally, if you're a younger athlete, just doing a skillful sport and then going and doing track is a very, yeah, that's a big toggle. And I'm sure it's important. I know it's important, those things, developmentally. But it's interesting to think, okay, once you have more advanced players and you don't have the option to say, hey, go run track in the off season. Okay.
Yeah.
Like you have to find within what they're doing spaces to constrain and force like higher velocities and things. And that's where you had written an article. I know it went to my email. I'm not sure if it's on the site or not, but it was something to do, and maybe the track technique was in there. The idea is there, but it was how you would build sport if it's all on the field. How you would set up the field itself, and for it could be, and I'd be curious too, because I think that people listening, as well as myself, or maybe it's not even the sport, but maybe if I'm just doing some small side gameplay, like you mentioned, handball or setting up a game and we're trying to also get these qualities to appear in the game. Tell me a little bit about how you manipulate the field, how you might manipulate some of the play setup to encourage like a higher speed or building speed that someone can have stick for the game itself.
Okay. Do you want me to go on the whiteboard?
You can. I know for most of this will be audio, so as long as it's not a big pause. If you want to, but I'd say as much as you can. If you need to write something, you can. But
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. Cool. Um. So I would play. So let's say we want to work on transition and transition skills. Okay, because you got to look at the game and go right. It's a longitudinal game. We go from one goal to the other, and at certain speeds. Okay, generally, and we want to repetitively practice some of that. Okay, so and I'm talking about fast attack versus slow attack earlier, right? A fast attack has different technical challenges for the defenders. They're coming at different angles, they're coming at different speeds, and you may get a bit more of side on chasing, tackling, chasing, running, and trying to push guys out of angles. Whereas in a set defense, you're going to be manning up a bit more. Okay, so that's the basic concepts there. So I might put a goal at the middle of the pitch, for argument's sake. So that's going to be about 70 meters out from the other goal, the main goal. Cut the pitch in half basically and play. And we might then play at a very basic level. Six guys start from one goal and attack the other guy goal, and six have stepped out to defend. Okay, and we'll have a goalkeeper on each side. Very basically, ball is scored or not. There's six guys behind the first goal that was defended, and they attack as soon as that play is dead. So the guys who were then attacking are now defending. Okay, so they're switched on. So that's a double play that is pretty physically challenging, right? And you're doing it over 60, 70 meters. So there's a certain turn and accelerate chase, which is something that will happen in the game, right? I don't over think about that. I don't instruct in any way at that level, right? So that's the very basic level. We could make it shorter and play 4v4s if the numbers dictated, or it was early in the season and I was worried about those longer distance runs, all outs, because I have a very motivated team and I know they're going to go hard. Sometimes 60, 80 meters is too much because they haven't done it, right, in recent times or whatever. So that's the base, right? So I'll have to observe that and how much effort is being made, and where are our weaknesses technically, tactically, skillfully, right? And then I might start putting in constraints after that. Okay. And those constraints might be I'll go 6v5. Okay. So there's five defenders step out and they play six forwards. And that goes up and down, right? So immediately I've completely changed the challenge. Okay. And it seems small, but it's a massive change. So there's an overlap. There's no chance of man on man. Okay. Now those accelerations have changed when they lose the ball or turn it over. Right. The defenders have to learn how to mark 1.5 men. Right. That would be the term you would use. Like, how do we split the spaces, again, they're at different angles when they're defending. So they lose or attacking for that matter. So I'm getting the ball at different angles. I'm making looped runs because we have an extra man, whatever. I kick the ball over the bar, end of play, but there's 6 guys coming out against me, and one of our players drops off, close to the goal or something like that, and away we go again. So then I might start with the type of thing I do a lot because it's important for Gaelic football is playing with width. And what we say is out to in runs are very damaging. If you can get players running from wide towards the goal at speed, a lot of the times you'll make it through or they'll foul you and you've a relatively easy score. Okay. So we might say it's 6v6. Okay. But I'll have put cones maybe 10 meters or 15 meters in from the sidelines, and at least 2 of the players have to go around those cones before they can get involved in the play again, right? So for 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds, whatever it is, it's actually 4v6. Okay? So what are those defenders going to do? Again, I'm probably saying very little. I'm just constraining the game and seeing how they react. So I can then, but that might get 2 guys, if they're clever or they know the type of games I play, which happens sometimes, but they will start pressing because they have 5 seconds there to possibly turn the ball back over, right? So those 2 guys who've gone wide, though, they know they need to help quickly. So they will run wide fast to cut it in at an angle. So that's an out to in run. So now I'm practicing something that's strategically or tactically important to the game of Gaelic football. We're actually practicing the physical run, right? It's some way representative in the match in that we're facing the main goal that we would be attacking. They're going to have to run fast to help their teammates, right? And of course, there's all sorts of things going on for the defending team, making decisions. Do we go for it or not? The guys who've only the 4 players at the moment, they'll be going forward. What are we going to do? Do we just hold? Which many of them do. So then it's a slow attack, not a fast attack, you know? So there's all these kind of things happening. And I might then change where something I do, I call a lot, I use a lot is called 2 wide, 2 deep game. So it's the same thing. They go wide, but they actually have to go deep as well, right? So they have to hit the end line before they can be involved in the play. What happens there is they're even longer out of the game. So it's even more pressure. So I weigh up the numbers then. Do I make that 7v4? And those players on the ball are, I might make it 7v6 to the defenders, but there's 2 guys gone. So how good is our ball control, our spacing, everything like that? And that then the speed of those guys getting wide and deep to come back into the play is important, right? So I'm working on game speed there. Yeah. And you can make that as big and wide and as long as you can and change the numbers and overload them in different ways. And you'll just see things, and teams will be different to team as well, actually. Mm-hmm. And then you just come up with new ideas. There's you start with that one constraint, and honestly, you could spend a whole season with that kind of practice. I call them wave practices or repetitive practices, but I've also used GPS. And an awful lot of the time, they reach better than game speeds.
Yes.
Right. And that's good because we're overloading.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to ask you with this. And that's what the advent of GPS technology, you can, to me, how fun, like to have this puzzle where it's like, how can I get, Justin Lima talked about this as well, like a kid who ran faster on the GPS in a game than he did in any like fly in practice, with just like, hey, you're just going on the gates or whatever, or maybe running down the field. And it was a guy like coming off the curve. He got this slingshot, had to chase a guy down. And I think about like the motivation of a player as well. just because we're so wired, and I'm sure you are seeing it or will see it, continue to see it with your child. Like they want to walk when there's something motivating to walk to, or they're just exploring. Eventually, like my daughter's almost 13 months now, and she just explores the whole house and causes havoc trying to follow her around. But like early on, they're interested in something, and it's just like our movement is so deeply linked. It's not just us; it's all the meaning and all the things going on outside of our bubble. And I know for me, I have a few things I want to go with that, and I want to, in terms of the way my brain processes, I look at this kind of like if I was developing a curriculum for, let's just say, a physical preparation coaches, as that continues to evolve, and maybe bring it to two things you said I thought was really interesting, because I was just playing, you mentioned handball, a game I've fallen on. I was just playing a game with a group. I started them on the game, and then I jumped in so it could be 5-on-4 to help the team that was losing quite badly. But it was like it was kind of a version of handball. It was basically ultimate football throwing into goals. Like we came up, I've come up with that and landed on that. I think it has a lot of really good qualities that intermix. But like you said, it's so different if it's 5-on-4 and you're not always on a man. If it's 4-on-4 and you're always on a man, the way you work is so much different than like a breakaway and you have more space to run free and things like that. And I actually feel like from a conditioning perspective, it's more challenging to be a one-on-one versus the 2-on-3 stuff. You can run more burst kind of things. And it reminded me of back when I was in high school. I know this is super common, but basketball always prepared me reasonably well for track the next season, even though it's a shorter court. But I swear it was like almost every day in practice, we did 3-on-2, 2-on-1. Like, okay, it's 3-on-2 down to one hoop. After that, it's 2-on-1. And, it's not like we were sprinting all out the whole time, but sometimes you went really fast. But it was just fun. You didn't even think about the fact that you were going quickly. But I mean, but then you take something that on a small basketball court and you extrapolate it out and you're going high speeds and it's a game. And it does make you rethink, okay, well, if you got all that with your setup 5-on-4, whatever it was on the 60-meter length, and if you got someone running faster than the game, then you would ask the question, well, is doing extra fly tens or something on top of this, where, do I need to do that still? Like, and I think that's the question, because it's like, since where the field is now, I think everyone kind of has their own job. Like, okay, this is my job. This is my job. This is my job. Well, we should do speed. Like, I want to do speed stuff, right? So it's interesting to think about. And Michael Zwiefel had talked about this. He had left the physical private training sector and then went just to coach football, to be a defensive. I think he was a defensive backs coach and worked as a defensive coordinator. He said the same. He said something to the tune of basically like the only speed training his players really do is stuff he sets up on the field in constraints. And that was after working speed for 15 years. So it's interesting to think about how the field will evolve with those things in mind. And yeah, GPS is, I think, also that awesome tool there, because that makes it more, there's a number. So it's, more definable speed training now.
Yeah. There's a lot there because I've made a lot of notes.
Yeah.
It's a massive conversation for me, and actually, I might get to it. There's a very unusual thing happening in Gaelic football as well at the moment, which is really interesting from my perspective, from the skill S&C mindset that I come into. They're my constraints, as we were talking about earlier. That's my context. I kind of look at things from those angles, from conditioning, staying injury free, but making the most out of your conditioning, and then the skill, like how do we make a team skillful with the individuals in it. And the rules in Gaelic football are changing, right? And it's funny you bring up the basketball, because it's all relevant to this. And I've worked in basketball and was lucky enough to work with Super League team here locally, and I learned a lot from that, right? And just my testing and analysis of the players and getting to know that sport. I'm working with the Irish 3x3 female team these days. And basketball is largely, and look, these are big buckets and it's always a mess and in between, but it's largely, I would say, an anaerobic sport, right? And they're switched on and their heart rates don't come down as fast, right? And now they have an interchange, which does change it a bit. But if you play a number of minutes in a row, you're going to be above your 85, 90% a lot, right?
Yeah.
And Soccer is probably the far end. Of course, they have explosive players, I get that, and they play fast transitions at times, but they would still, I would say, be on the more aerobic side. Okay. And my experience, soccer players, which I played and tested and coached as well, is that they are very aerobic. And like they really are aerobic animals. And then Gaelic football, Aussie rules would be similar, would be very hybrid, very, very hybrid games, right? A lot of running, but a lot of physicality, and a lot of things in between. But what's happened with Gaelic football now is that they've changed rules because people were getting bored of the game, right? Which is fair enough. But what I've figured out, they left some expertise on the sidelines, unfortunately. They didn't have skilled people, they didn't have sports scientists, data people, they didn't have an S&C coach in on the committee, right? And they're paying for it now because we possibly are heading towards an injury epidemic, right? Because the game of Gaelic football, which is played on up to a 90, 130 meter long by 90, now 15v15, but there's still quite a bit of space, right? And because of that, it got very defensive. Teams dropped back, right? They got more skillful. You couldn't leave too much space, blah, blah. But that meant it was boring. It was less entertaining. There's no doubt about that. So they've created a game where you have to keep three up and three back and both sides. So that's fair enough. It's not the worst idea in the world. But what has happened, and this was obvious to me at the start, is that the middle eight are now playing basketball. Like they're involved in every play. And I've got to see some heart rate. This has only started last weekend in the official competitions. I got to see some of the data, and now it's an anaerobic game for those 8 guys, right? It is like they're up there all the time, right? And we don't have an interchange. So that's a big problem coming, right? So that's that. But some of the solutions to that I would have thought anyway, getting ready for this new game, which in a lot of ways I support and look forward to, is the basketball 1v1. So a lot of basketball I've seen, they would, I think this is very common from talking to the guys I know, they would go from 1v1 to 5v5 straight through, and that would be the most of the practice session. So you play 1v1 for a while, 2v2 for a while, 3v3 for a while, 4v4, and that was a way of building up to all sorts of small games and constraints inside and in between that. And that is a very anaerobic practice. And you were saying about 1v1, I use some real, like those Joel Jemison cardio, extreme cardiac intervals that he created. I created some of them in Gaelic football. And I never got a team above 60 seconds. Maybe within those teams, a couple of players would have been able to do it. But this is one-on-one football, passing to a kind of a goalie at either side, your teammate. 60 seconds on, 60 seconds off, the other two come in. And it's horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. But it's in that high level, like, you're getting the heart rate up and there's skill involved as well.
Yeah.
Right. So there's those players love that challenge, but it's very, very hard. But I'm going to go back to that again. And that manning up is so, so difficult. And I think it's underappreciated. And a lot of coaches in Gaelic football in recent years, it was evolving into, we'll just go man to man. But man to man, for me, only works if you're more athletic than the opposition. And if you're not, you have to have better tactics. That's a very broad statement now, but you got to make it work with your team as opposed to your individuals, right? So, but that's the interesting about Gaelic football now and the change that we're going to have to get more anaerobic, right? And funnily enough, the three up, three back guys are doing way less running, volume wise. But I just wonder about the length of their sprints, right? I think that's changed. So that's a new variant there. The thing you were talking about, the equipment there with the GPS, right? And if you have the resources and you have a team coach like me and an S&C coach like I am sometimes with some other team coach, it's the most important relationship in sport for me, right? Like, as long as everything else is fairly normal, the head coach or the manager or whatever it's called is a decent person and isn't falling guys out and all this kind of stuff, and there's a motivated team, and all things are fairly even, right? That relationship, which is exactly what you're talking about, I think, and that where S&C coaches, I think, need to go as well. And ideally, if they have sports that they're particularly interested in and played in, that they have a deep understanding of, that is the next level of speed training. It's the next level. So it's just general and specific conditioning. But that relationship, if you get into it with a field coach and say a manager, whatever, head coach, whatever, and go, look, this is the way we want to play. I love that. Now I'm doing it as a solo often, right? But I would love someone to challenge me a bit more. And I got that with basketball because Kieran, who was a player coach, right, which was quite unusual, um, it was a constraints guy, right? Very ecologically driven. And the two of us were kind of trying to create. Now he did most 99.9% of the coaching, but we would then discuss what's going on and how is that athletically challenging us. So I'd watch their training and go, I don't think there's much need for me here tonight at times. Like what are we going to do? So we would just do short acceleration, speed work. I might use tempo running actually to teach recovery, just to change the pace of training. We would do 3 70% up and down the court, walk one. That, just for 3 to 5 reps or something like that to change training as much as anything. So I totally agree. I also think though that culture matters. So if with certain teams, so put it this way, I might have a better practice session that incorporates speed, acceleration, game-based stuff, the whole lot. I'm I'm certain the training I do now is better than I did 5 years ago, right? But there's things that I did 5 years ago that teams I might meet now expect, right? So I might just have to put in some linear stuff there just to buy a bit of
Yeah.
favor, but create relationships, just not throw them too much,
Mhm.
um, and all that kind of stuff. So that cultural stuff, where are we at? Like I know some of the things that I talk about, practice, develop. Like actually, I have the perfect experiment. Like it is rejected strongly in hurling, rejected very strongly and verbally. I've been abused for my views. I'm developing hurling, right? Whereas in Gaelic football, the very same people,
Hmm.
like I mean, literally the very same people have a total different view on how skill is developed in hurling. Well, not total different, but
Mhm.
quite a different view to how skill is developed in Gaelic football. You know, so like the culture can be, and then you think about countries or sports, um, and it's wild. But I do think S&C stroke the relationships with coaches, that is the next level for, and of course, there's loads of people doing that really well already.
Yeah. Yeah, I something you said, Kevin, I thought was really interesting with back to like the one-on-ones and the 60-second, because I think you were kind of comparing, you had done Joel Jamieson's like cardio work and the guys had a hard time with it, and then you do one-on-ones and I think you were comparing a little bit about like heart rate and how high it gets. And my question would be, I have some more like speed and change of direction and deceleration questions for you, but I had heard someone say this recently, and I would concur with this for the most part, was they had said something where when they only did, people, I know this is a contentious thing. Should we do conditioning, extra aerobic? How much aerobic should we do? This person, it was at a conference I hosted with Austin Yoakum, and he had said, when I just played, we just played, and I think we played hard. I was in better condition for my sport than like some other year where we did a lot of conditioning on top of that or something, and that would make me think, okay, motivating, high heart rate sport play versus, I don't know what's the heart rate of the conditioning. What's the specificity? I am curious. I'm curious what you're getting out of heart rates with those like 1v1 drills versus like maybe a Joel Jamieson versus a tempo running. I'd be curious what you see there in those in terms of capacity building.
Yeah, there's a huge amount there, and I think we're on the same page. And was it Joachim? Sorry,
Yeah, Yoakum, Austin Yoakum.
Austin Joachim. Sorry, Austin. I've listened to you guys talk, and I've read some of his stuff and watched some of his videos and stolen some of his practices. In fact, um, and I think we're relatively close to all the same page in a lot of that. Like, just jumping back, but to use it here, like we were talking about motivation and the drive to do things,
Mm-hmm.
right? Uh like drawing their attention to something
Yeah.
is key. Okay. And if your intention is to get fitter, you have probably got a better chance of doing that if they enjoy it, right? So there's all sorts of psychological stuff that I'm not qualified to even consider. But I know is in there. I just know it's in there from years of playing and being around people, and the smile on kids when we play handball. Some of them are just up in the gym going, how long is this going to take? When are we playing handball? Some of them, the girls will always say it, yeah, when are we going? When are we going? Whereas other girls then are like loving the gym. So there's, different strokes. Um, so, this is conversation coming up in Ireland and Gaelic sports and other sports recently with very experienced people who actually come from the strength and conditioning world. And I wonder, is the strength and conditioning stuff, and I'd be guilty of this myself at times, is just measuring and control. Are we too controlled? And if we let them play, and this was a complaint of a top level coach like a number of years ago, and the S&C world kind of, I wouldn't say mocked him, but like, I think the feeling I got was people thought he was ignorant, right? But he had a very important point that sometimes we just need to leave the game play and let them at it and not have, and I do this all the time, right? Something I have in for a 6-minute game and it ends up being 40 because they're killing each other. Or I can see, they've taken the nestle and it's going, or they're having fun, depending on the age, or they're, you know, going hard at each other, or I'm seeing positive things, or whatever. And I think the motivation to go hard, right, if it's in a game, and we can talk about the constraints and the size of games and changing boundaries and all that kind of crap. But ultimately, if they're going hard and they're enjoying it,
Yeah.
that fitness, I 100% agree with you and Austin, is hard to quantify. And if we have the equipment like GPS and heart rate monitor to go with it, absolutely do it. But and I think there's a reward for athletes or people. There's a reward for people. I shouldn't even say, humans, when we go all out and we recover and we look back on it, there is a great feeling of that, whether it's dopamine or whatever it is that allows us to enjoy that. And then you do it as a group. There's a social part to that as well. So yeah, I agree with that. I mean, something I've started doing more and more is even say remote clients who are not in a team setting, particularly the more sprint profile types, right? And they want to improve their VO2 max, and I get to do uncontrolled VO2 running. So they have the heart rate monitor, blah blah, or they might have a watch for speed. I prefer speed for VO2 running for team sport athletes generally, if they have it. And just go as long as you can at the 105% of mass, right? Just go as long as you can. If that's 4 minutes for the first block, let the heart rate go down to 120, 130, something like that, and go again and accumulate that way, right? And I think it's in the same sphere of, the Norwegian method of 4x4x4, which are very effective for athletes and teams if there's a gap there, a capacity gap there. But if you can develop that in some way in a game, and again, and this is something I spoke about on a coaching group that I was brought on to recently about the new rules in Gaelic football, actually, I brought the basketball into it. And I was like, I'm definitely going to do the 1v1, 2v2, 3v3, and then I'll probably go to 6v6 up to maybe 12v12, which is probably the kind of numbers we'll have at training. Concept. I'm going to do sessions where it's just that, right? And I don't know how they're going to go. I'll put a few GPSs on a couple of guys. I don't have a whole team of them, but and we'll see what happens. But it's unlikely they won't enjoy that. I would say they're footballers. They're there to play football. Now they do like a lot of the external stuff. They like with lifting weights. They do like sprinting. They do like that stuff. So there's, and it is important, and some of it being measurable is helpful. It absolutely is. But I'm definitely on your side of that as well. And there's just so much, again, putting the ecological hat on, there's just so much going on in that. that is unquantifiable. But if we get them turning up again, motivated, we're winning.
Yeah. Yeah. It's to think one of the things that has really shifted, and you mentioned attention. It's like, where is that? Once you dial in the spotlight of attention and the community and competition, like everything else, sometimes it just takes care of itself in many ways.
Yeah.
And that's the to watch those things emerge. What you mentioned with like the games, like I thought this was so cool. You're like, okay, well, I thought I was only going to play this game for a few minutes, and then it turned into 40. Those are the best. It reminds me of something that Eric Guthrie was saying, where I don't know what team it was, but it was like a balloon basketball or something. Like hit a balloon and you try to like keep hitting it up into the hoop. And he said they played it for like a half hour, 40 minutes or something, and everyone just walked in just sweating. Like what? But and like you said, it's like, well, what were the exact? There's nothing tactical there, but it was fun. And those are also the things you remember too. Like, hey, remember that time we
Yeah.
played this game for 40 minutes and it was awesome, and that there's a lot to that.
And I would slightly disagree, just nitpicking there, but like I think it's very tactical.
Mm,
Like we may not be able to describe it, or I may not be talking about principles of play with a game I just let run. But you know, funny enough, it's probably different training for them. And like tactics change when you're tired.
yeah.
So you know what I mean? So maybe we get to have a discussion at the end because we did that for 12 minutes straight, guys, and you were heaving,
Hmm.
but I noticed you started positioning yourself better. So,
Yeah.
like and or you didn't. So maybe you're not conditioned enough and it's good to see it here. So yeah, I think allowing in a week where it's possible um open play,
Yeah.
like unscripted, just play the game, uh is important and arguably more and more important just because of many factors in the way the world is. Again, going back to the attention and intention, draw like design with intention is something I would use a lot, and draw their attention to what you're trying to work on. But you can do that with play as well.
Yeah. It reminds me of when I was in Washington State about, she was almost 4 years ago now, at Rafe Kelly's Evolve Move Play. I It's almost like the language he used to describe some of the games was like how much fun this is. I think I remember
Yeah,
one game was like King of the Hill. In some way, there's like three people up on a sand dune, and everyone else had to kind of get around them and get the flag and stuff. And he had said something about the tactics or logistics. He's like, but it's a lot of fun, and it's like to think about how you describe a practice. Of course, you have to check the boxes and the tactics, but to save at least some time for, hey, this variant is a lot of fun. Just because
yeah,
that's another ingredient that I think it can teach you something too. And it's all to also see how players react after you did that game that was just a ton of fun that everybody loved. Even if you go back to maybe a more formal thing, there's a way that impacts that as well. And I won't forget those games we played. I'll never forget. I use them in general gym sessions occasionally. Like there's this King of the Log thing that kind of organically emerged. And yeah, it's just that shapes the way I see how much fun are we having if I set up any game in many ways.
yeah. And I'm going to do more of this. I haven't done an unbelievable lot of it, amount of it, but I have spoke to coaches I know recently, more and more about it, and I think some co-designing with players on some of this stuff,
Hmm.
and even if they ask for something that's more methodical or linear, like, oh, I think we need to get fitter. Uh, okay, how about you go away and design a game,
Hmm.
right? That the ball is involved with, but you think is going to be make you fit, right?
Hmm.
And unless it's outlandishly silly,
Yeah.
you should go with it,
Yes.
and see what happens. And I guarantee a coach is going to learn because you're going to learn about the players and how they look at fitness. And is that turning into an educational piece then all of a sudden? Like, do I need to tell them more about what I do or educate them on what conditioning is or what you know what I mean?
Hmm.
So, or not, it might be an avenue to better training sessions. So yeah,
Yeah, I was as you were talking, and even just thinking about Rafe's retreat, I was thinking, yeah, what makes something fun? Like, what are the ingredients? And you had said too, there's a little bit of that like silliness, like novelty, like where you get like, I guess, permission to get outside, always needing to be serious, and it's like a deep pressurization. But it's interesting also to think of what context, it's optimal or ideal in. Like when I'm training youth soccer, that's my number one. If anything, youth soccer has actually taught me, it's how can we have the maximal amount of fun pretty much every practice. But of
Yeah.
course, and then I was thinking about like, watching like, Michael Jordan documentary on Netflix. And I feel like, well, Michael Jordan I feel like he'd try to kill you. I don't know. Like
Yeah.
he was always so hard on everybody. And I wonder what kind of, is there any space for that? Probably in his off, he wouldn't play golf. That was his depressurizing, and you just think of a different context. But yeah, it is. It's something that I think we don't, the biopsychosocial, or to use bigger words, right? Like, but it's
Yeah.
important, and we don't. Yeah, just to consider those like emotional off pressurings that give people permission to do something else. And
Yeah. Yeah, there's two things came to mind there when you were talking about that. I mean, like, what did Dennis Rodman do? Like, I don't
yeah,
know, but I'm observing and remembering
yeah,
from a long time ago, and I'm watching documentaries. But like, maybe he was that yin to the yang,
yeah, just kind of being naturally.
you
He's
know.
naturally just looking at the guy. It's like it almost like you can't take it all so seriously, and how he operated. Yeah, I could say
And then another thing that happened not that long ago, 2 or 3 seasons ago, uh, one of the players took me aside after training with a football team I was working with and said, Kevin, we need to stop this fun shit. Like, these little games that start the training, the tag, like, come on, like, this is serious stuff. Um, no, I shut it down, right? I said, look, it's not. We're not spending our whole training session doing stuff. Um, I shut it down because I think it was making him feel uncomfortable as opposed to the whole group.
Mm,
But it was an interesting insight into the culture and some of the people involved that, you know, uh, you do have to try and hit everybody. Was he getting challenged enough? Did he feel we were lazy in other ways, or was there players kind of ducking out of stuff later on in the
yeah,
training, and he kind of associated that with that,
yeah,
and I had that conversation eventually, and I had a second conversation with him when I got the chance to have a think about it. Um, so it is, and things are cultural, and people come to practice or games with different mindsets. But the bigger the teams, the the I don't think it's different in any team actually. What am I
mm,
saying?
mm,
Um, People will come with different focuses. It doesn't mean they don't want to win, right? But to facilitate them playing at their best might be doing absolutely nothing
mm,
before the game, right?
yeah,
Lying down in the dressing room. I've seen people do that, like, and other guys looking and going, like, how is he going to do anything in 20 minutes or an hour or whatever? And then there's the other guys who need to foam roll. They need to spend 60 minutes prepping, tape, and all this kind of stuff. But it's a ritual,
yeah.
and it gets them comfortable. And then once they're performing, it's not a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting to think about. Yeah, what they. I was even thinking what you were saying kind of got me thinking about, back to Michael Jordan. There was a video, it was of him with people saying, well, what made Michael so good? And whoever was talking was like, it actually wasn't the speed or the jumping it was that he lived in the present moment so well. And like between games, he'd be like joking, kind of like a little, I don't necessarily want to say silly, but it was almost like he was chilling to let that killer out on the court, and he had and also just staying present minded and present moment. And I guess, yeah, maybe there's just different variations of how you could apply, I guess, like a fun novel experience depending on the context like that. But it is interesting what you mentioned too with like the player. It's like if you feel like the team's screwing off, and it is an interesting situation and way of putting that. And I guess, yeah, there's probably deeper conversations certainly warranted beyond that. But
Yeah, yeah. And I think with Jordan there, like he had great skills, obviously, in that way.
mm,
And that's like, think about the big picture is in between practices, and um, being more jovial at
mm,
the right times. But he clearly had that in the game. Like, he just knew the moments.
yeah,
And sometimes guys who are fairly close in talent, but one of them becomes the superstar,
yeah,
is simply that, like, oh, we need a play here, or I need to go get a turnover, or they just intuitively feel the game is getting away from them, or it's time to do something here because I know intuitively we need 4 minutes to turn 6 points around because and those people, even though they might not be thinking mathematically about it, they have just such a deep feel for the game, press buttons within themselves and maybe other people. And they generally are the reason they are the best
Yeah.
of the best.
Yeah, that's the thing. To me, that's just the thing that's so fun to get into. I find myself watching more and more, like studying the legends, and not just like physical traits, but like how did they grow up? What was their like life like? Like how do they see things? And just yeah, like just to understand how they mentally and emotionally process the game, because that was always my weakness too. Because I was always the I just try to be better physically because that was just what I had and knew and all I could try to do. And even then I wasn't always the best physically. And if that was true, then I was totally done. So it's almost like the next 20 years and up till now, it's like thinking about how to be more present with the game, how to find joy in the play itself. And even too, like as you're talking, like it's like, man, I want to get on a team and like work on some of these different constraints and of uneven sides or man on man, and how do I set up the size of the field and how do I challenge, especially slowing down. Like I hated practices where it was like, oh, we got to make 10 passes before you score. I was just like, oh, like this is terrible. I just think about stuff like that. But hey, I know our time's almost done. I probably got like not even nearly through the questions, but usually that's always a good sign. But just to round things out and maybe back into the, I guess maybe more formal world of sorts. But along the lines that you had said, you were talking about track speed and like an overemphasis of track style, speed and running in team sport. And I was just curious what you think about like deceleration and change of direction along those same lines. Like you set it up, man on man, is that creating there's pretty much everything you need? Do you need to do more outside of it? I know a lot of physical prep coaches like to do more deceleration work or whatnot outside of those things. Any thoughts on that with the context of, change of direction and deceleration qualities?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's still a place for a bit of formal training. Planting the foot, choppy steps. I run warm ups. I've kind of three levels, very basic kind of circuit type, stop start, really short shuttles, planting and starting off different feet, and things like that, which is very near. And I'm given the instruction off a whistle usually, right? So there's a little bit of response stimuli. I think then, and it's basically the same as everything else we've spoke about. Now, I think some of the deceleration stuff is probably important in the gym as well. At the end of the day, a lot of the forces we know from the shear forces put through the knee, a lot of injuries happen in that deceleration phase, ACLs in particular, a lot of knee stuff. So I think training that in the gym with depth jumps and various types of squats and whatnot is important. Absolutely. Again, then from the game side of things, not to say that the game sorts everything, but I would think in Gaelic football and soccer anyway, we use a lot of small sided games. And if anything, I would say it went the way of doing too much acceleration and deceleration in the game, right? So the small sided games and the change of direction were fatiguing players above the overload was too over, right? Um, because if you play 4v4 in a 40x40 pitch or a 60x20 pitch or something like that, you're getting a lot of actions, right? So I've observed, and I probably did it myself at the start when I was really using a lot of smaller games, is you really can't go over 3 or 4 minutes in a lot of these practices because they're visibly getting fatigued. So they're like that. The whole in this part of the world, in both sports, in hurling and football, in rugby a little bit, certainly in hockey and soccer, uh, probably stealing largely from soccer. The small side of game became the main part of training in a lot of cases. So very common thing in Gaelic football, which again was successful at the start. It's like me with my track coach and doing some tempos with Charlie Francis type tempos, like that got me a jump, or the teams I worked with a jump. Um, but similarly, then the small set of games gave you a jump because
Yeah.
one, they were getting technically better. At the end of the day, they were getting technically better, so that they were developing their skills. But there was an excessive use of those small sided games. So,
Hmm.
I think what I'd still use, of course, for technical reasons and for those uh, changes of direction. And then I might sometimes constrain certain games where you have to leave a zone after a pass. Very deliberate practice of having to follow your run or change zones or get outside the pitch. Uh, and then I'll put constraints when they get used to the game. I might put in 5-second constraint to do that. So you'll see then the plant and change of direction. And if it's not happening, I would go back to a little bit of interventionist formal practice, either individually maybe or with the group, saying, just let's concentrate on this when you go outside to sprint back in. Let's plant the foot, load your body in the right way over the body, get over the foot, and all that kind of stuff. So I do think there's a place for it, and it goes back to if there's poor basic levels of it, then absolutely it works, and even a blocked approach to it works. But at some point, you're going to have to challenge that.
Yeah. Yeah. That was the thing that I was going to ask is the difference between almost like raw physical qualities. Okay. So you need to be able to do a reasonably deep squat, descend the pelvic floor, being able to do plyometrics with deep ranges like squat jumps, like you said, depth jumps or bunny hops, squatted bunny hops and those kind of things. You think, okay, if I can do this and I grew up playing sports and the ideal technique should fall into place in terms of changing direction and decelerating and those kind of things. So that's where I was going to ask you, beyond that, like if you had those two things, should there still be a need to be like, okay, well, you need to plant like this, or you know what I'm saying? It sounds like there are those cases where people do need it in how you work, but I'm just curious on a little bit
No,
more clarification there.
I don't interfere too much
Yeah.
unless
Okay.
it's terrible.
Okay. Got it.
If I think there's a danger or there's, possibly over enthusiasm sometimes,
Mm.
or maybe a loss in force, their change of direction is too sloppy, or they're not applying any force really, in certain situations. And I think you can, like, the change of direction, say going back to that 6v4 or 6v6 with the too wide, too deep, like you see high speed changes of direction there.
Mm.
Because I've put a cone out there, right? That's not going to be
Yeah.
there in the game,
Yeah.
but here is some of our athletic practice. They'll go around that. Some of them will curve it, some of them will sharp turn. And that's probably them using their own physical constraints or genetics because that's what suits them. And I'm happy with that because I'm not interfering too much with them. And then they may follow that with, if it's a deep run followed by it, that's a more direct, straight, choppy steps. And maybe the odd time I'll have a chat with them or pull them off the pitch quickly and go like, you'll be more efficient when you're changing direction or slowing down if you do this.
Hmm.
And then turn and go for the ball, make your ball run or whatever. So yeah, over time it's just intervening at the right time. And I maybe it's because I'm the coach and the S&C at the same time often. I don't want to overcoach.
Yeah.
Unless it's unless I'm worried about it, or I think there's a big deficiency, I tend not to intervene,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Yeah. It strikes me that as soon as you have the hat of go from a physical prep to coach, and I even see this when I coach youth soccer, like it's the tactics that are by far and the techniques. And it's kind of like, I like the Rafe Kelly had said, train at the highest level of complexity. And then hopefully everything else falls into place under that umbrella of the highest possible complexity. And I even think too there was a cool study that did go out, with the deceleration training piece. I forget who the author was, but it had said people who did deceleration training saw improved like counter movement jumps as well, because dynamic quad stimulus, right? Like,
Yeah.
And some of the most explosive times of my life, when I played more basketball, even before college, like I just remember after this one basketball practice my senior year, just like flying, and we had been doing a ton of yes, basketball, but also like change of direction, court sprints and stuff. And coaches get me all fired up. So biopsychosocial and all that. And so like, but I didn't need to do, honestly, if someone would have said, hey, we're going to do deceleration practice, I have air quotes, and they just said, hey, do 5 or 10 run and stops, I don't think I would have gotten near that overload that gave me just playing basketball and doing those sprints like racing people, you know? And so I
Yeah,
wonder in studies like that, well, what was the control group doing? You know, because if they were doing, like you
yeah,
said, small sided games, you're getting an overload there, you know,
yeah,
so it's just interesting to think about, like, yeah, how do you put this all together based on what the team in front of you is actually doing? And how do you, yeah, so interesting stuff for sure.
yeah. And that brings me back to basketball though. And even now that I veered into 3v3, 3x3 basketball, which is another variation because they have a lot more, it's a much more physical strength is probably even more pronounced.
Hmm.
And they have a lot more shorter, but more acceleration, decelerations. Um, but say like basketball, kind of exactly what you're saying, Joel. I wouldn't spend a lot of time on depth jumping,
Yeah.
right? Uh, much more on the lower level, like rudimentary type work with
Mhm.
basketballers, extensive work, and strength and absorbing and like, and I wouldn't ignore anything really, but it's not something I'd be overly because they're getting so much of that landing. I don't know how much more of it they really need when they do so much in the sport.
Yeah. I know for me personally, just this being N of one is my junior year of high school, the year a few months before I had bought the Science of Jumping program, which was all like depth jumps. And it was awesome. I gained like I was also doing like I started doing sumo deadlifts, which for me with like a narrow infrasternal angle, I think it was a good angle to train my hips well to develop that pattern. But I also did the deadlifts and I improved my 1 and 2 leg jump went up like 5 inches. It was awesome. I was like, I found the secret. Like I was so stoked. But then the next year, funny enough, well, that year my vertical started to actually diminish throughout the course of the season. I stopped doing the depth jumps and, you know, it kind of peaked and then petered off a little bit. But then the next year I didn't do barely any depth jumps. I did the school strength and conditioning class and doing deep squats and stuff. And well, my vertical went down a little bit, my one leg in the midst of deep squatting. But then after that class was over, it all came back and I maintained it through the whole season and was even better. And I think
Mm.
doing a lot of those fast, that was the year too that we did a lot more of that fast, like line to line stuff too. And it's almost like I gained the thing. And maybe some players just have it more than I did. I needed to do more depth jumps, I think, just to get to the level that some other people were at. But then once I
Yeah,
had it, I actually was able to maintain a lot of it just doing some lifting and doing fast, explosive, yeah, change of directions, both playing and in the work done after practice, which is interesting to think because it's like I think so often we try to hold on to, oh, we have to have this and this thing has to be in the training program or this thing has to be in. But it's like, well,
yeah,
the game can do it. You know, that's the best place to have it. And then you just supplement around it.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me of like, say, if you want to look at the anaerobic speed reserve with team athletes as a way of having a look at players at least, is, you know, those explosive sprint type guys. They don't tend to need a lot of strength training, or they can get away with a lower volume of it. And once they hit a kind of a one exercise at a max level, they seem to be able to maintain it. Whereas those stringy endurance guys who can run all day need a different approach sometimes. You know what I mean? And um, yeah, that is the skill of it with teamwork in particular, obviously, to find that balance.
Yeah, for sure. I know there's a lot there's a lot more ways I could take the questions I had, but I know our time's coming to an end. Actually, I wanted to ask you, Kevin, if there's any, you know, projects. I think you did a course or a mini course recently. So before we click the record button off here, is there anything you want to share before we finish our conversation that you're up to?
Yeah, so my life has brought me to become a little bit more remote in some of the work I'm doing, at least. And I've set up a coaching cohort group, which has started only like 10 days ago, maybe. I think there's 13 people on it at the moment. And that's a group for coaches, I think, largely into team sport who want to learn how to design team sport practice or develop it more, or if they're new, you know, where do they start? With the bit of S&C sports science angle that I come from as well. So I'm running that, doing some videos on that for people, and if they want to contact me, they can contact me through the details. I'm sure it'll be on the end of the podcast. Um, and I was running one team, remote team, group that people can join, which was a general preparation, for health, for regular people, for want of a better description. But I've added, field fit and an everyday athlete programs. They're on Anaerobic if people want to check them out. And the everyday athlete is aimed at the retired athletes, which, people in my age bracket, let's say, and I think there's a lot of them out there, and they tend to like a different type of training, and they like being challenged. And then I've a field fit, which is for present sub-elite athletes who don't have the support or resources of, say, an SC coach or anything like that in their group. So they're all available through my usual socials, or people can contact me and on my email. No problem. But the coaching cohort is one that I'm excited by, and the people in it are starting to interact with it, and I can, get in the whiteboard and do some videos and help people with developing design coaching. Uh, in that sense, for team sports, that's where I'm going with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm excited to see where that coaching cohort leads. I'm sure next time we have a conversation, I'll definitely have to ask you about that. So, well, sounds good, Kevin. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today. It was great having you.
No problem. I love being on, Joel. It's great to talk about all this stuff.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode. I appreciate you being here, and I'll see you next week.